The Byzantine Empire had a complex system of aristocracy and bureaucracy, which was inherited from the Roman Empire. At the apex of the hierarchy stood the emperor, who was the sole ruler and who was considered to be divinely ordained. Beneath him, a multitude of officials and court functionaries operated the complex administrative machinery that was necessary to run the empire. In addition to those officials, a large number of honorific titles existed, which the emperor awarded to his subjects or to friendly foreign rulers. Over the more than 1,000 years of the empire's existence, different titles were adopted and discarded, and many lost or gained prestige. At first, the various titles of the empire were the same as those in the late Roman Empire. However, by the time that Heraclius was emperor, many of the titles had become obsolete. By the time of Alexios I's reign, many of the positions were either new or drastically changed. However, from that time on they remained essentially the same until the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. Background history. In the early Byzantine period, the system of government followed the model established in late Roman times under Diocletian and Constantine the Great, with a strict separation between civil and military officers and a scale of titles corresponding to office, where membership and not in the Senate was the major distinguishing characteristic. Following the transformation of the Byzantine state during the 7th century on account of massive territorial loss to the Muslim conquests, this system vanished, and during the Classic or Middle period of the Byzantine state, a new, court-centered system emerged. In this, the new titles derived from older, now obsolete, public offices, and dignities of a certain level were awarded with each office. A senatorial class remained in place, which incorporated a large part of the upper officialdom, as every official from the rank of protospatarios was considered a member of it. During this period, many families remained important for several centuries, and several emperors rose from the aristocracy. Two groups can be distinguished: a metropolitan civil nobility and a provincial military one, the latter remaining regionally based and having large land holdings, but apparently no military forces of their own, in contrast to contemporary Western Europe. The 10th and 11th centuries saw a rise in importance of the aristocracy, and an increased number of new families entering it. The catastrophic losses in the latter 11th century again prompted a reorganization of the imperial administrative system. At the hands of the new Komnenos dynasty, the older offices and titles fell gradually into disuse, while an array of new honorifics emerged, which signified primarily the closeness of the recipient's familial relationship to the emperor. The Komnenian-led empire, and later their Palaeologan successors, were based primarily on the landed aristocracy, keeping the governance of state tightly controlled by a limited number of intermarrying aristocratic families. In the 11th and 12th century, for instance, some 80 civil and 64 military noble families have been identified, a very small number for so large a state. Finally, in the Palaeologan system as reported by Pseudo-Codinos, one can discern the accumulated nomenclature of centuries, with formerly high ranks having been devalued and others taken the place, and the old distinction between office and dignity had vanished. Imperial titles. These were the highest titles, usually limited to members of the imperial family or to a few very select foreign rulers, whose friendship the emperor desired. Titles used by the emperors. Basileus, the Greek word for sovereign, which originally referred to any king in the Greek-speaking areas of the Roman Empire. It also referred to the emperors of Persia. Heraclius adopted it to replace the old Latin title of Augustus in 629, and it became the Greek word for emperor. Heraclius also used the titles autocrator and Kyrios. The Byzantines reserved the term basileus among Christian rulers exclusively for the emperor in Constantinople, and referred to Western European kings as reges, a Hellenized form of the Latin word rex. The feminine form basilissa referred to an empress. Empresses were addressed as Usubstate Augusta, and were also called Kyria or Despoina. Primogeniture, or indeed heredity itself, was never legally established in Byzantine imperial succession, because in principle the Roman emperor was selected by common acclamation of the Senate, the people and the army. This was rooted firmly in the Roman Republican tradition, whereby hereditary kingship was rejected and the emperor was nominally the convergence of several officers of the republic onto one person. Many emperors, anxious to safeguard the firstborn son's right to the throne, had them crowned as co-emperors when they were still children, thus assuring that upon their own death the throne would not be even momentarily vacant. In such a case the need for an imperial selection never arose. In several cases the new emperor ascended the throne after marrying the previous emperor's widow, or indeed after forcing the previous emperor to abdicate and become a monk. Several emperors were also deposed because of perceived inadequacy, e.g., after a military defeat, and some were murdered. Porphyrogenitos, born in the purple, emperors wanting to emphasize the legitimacy of their ascent to the throne appended this title to the names, meaning they were born in the delivery room of the imperial palace to a reigning emperor, and were therefore legitimate beyond any claim to the contrary whatsoever. Autocrator, self-ruler. This title was originally equivalent to imperator, and was used by the emperors. Titles used by the imperial family despots. Lord. This title was used by the emperors themselves since the time of Justinian I, and was an honorific address for the sons of reigning emperors. It was extensively featured in coins in lieu of basileus. In the 12th century, Manuel I Komnenos made it a separate title, the highest awarded title after the emperor. The first such despot was actually a foreigner, Bela III of Hungary, signifying that Hungary was considered a Byzantine tributary state. In later times, a despot could be the holder of a despotate. For example, the despotate of Morea, centered at Mistra, was held by the heir to the Byzantine throne after 1261. The feminine form, despoina, referred to a female despot or the wife of a despot, but it was also used to address the empress. Sebastocrator, venerable ruler, a title created by Alexios I Komnenos as a combination of autocrator and sebastos. The first Sebastocrator was Alexius' brother Isakios. It was essentially a meaningless title, which signified only a close relationship with the emperor, but ranked immediately after the despots. The feminine form was Sebastocratorissa. The first foreigner to be called Sebastocrator was Stefan Nemanjić of Serbia, who was given the title in 1191. A Bulgarian aristocrat by the name Kaloyan also used the title Kaiser, Caesar. Originally, as in the late Roman Empire, it was used for a subordinate co-emperor, the heir apparent, and was first among the awarded dignities. The office enjoyed extensive privileges, great prestige and power. When Alexios I created Sebastocrator, Kaiser became third in importance, and fourth after Manuel I created despots. The feminine form was Kaiserissa. It remained, however, an office of great importance, and was awarded to a few high-ranking and distinguished officials, and was only rarely awarded to foreigners. Justinian II named Tervel, Khan of the Bulgars, Kaiser in 705. The title then developed into the Slavic term Tsar. Andronikos II Paleologos also named Roger de Flor, leader of the Catalan Grand Company, Kaiser in 1304. Nobillissimos, from the Latin nobilissimus, originally a title given to close relatives of the emperor, subordinate only to the Kaiser. During the Komnenian period, the title was awarded to officials and foreign dignitaries, diluting its status. The title protonobilissimos was created in its stead, until it too started to decline, only to be replaced by a further augmented form, protonobilissimo hypatatos. By the late Paleologan era, the former had vanished, while the latter was a provincial official, Couropalates, from the Latin cura palatii, charge of the palace. First attested in the time of Justinian I, it was the official in charge of the running of the imperial palace. However, the great authority and wealth deriving from this position, as well as the close proximity to the emperor, meant that it accumulated great prestige. It was awarded to important members of the imperial family, but from the 11th century onwards, it declined, and was usually awarded to the vassal rulers of Armenia and Georgia. Sebastos, August 1. This title is the literal Greek translation of the Latin term Augustus or Augustos, was sometimes used by the emperors. As a separate title it appeared in the latter half of the 11th century, and was extensively awarded by Alexios I Komnenos to his brothers and relations. The female version of the title was Sebaste. The special title Protosebastos was created for Hadrianos, Alexia's second brother, and awarded also to the Doge of Venice and the Sultan of Iconium. During the 12th century, it remained in use for the emperors and the Sebastocrates' children and senior foreign dignitaries. However, the parallel processes of proliferation and devaluation of titles during the 12th century resulted in the creation of a bewildering array of often ridiculously large variations. By using the prefixes pan, hyper, proto, examples include pansebastos, panhypersebastos, or hyperprotopansebastohypatatos. Few of them actually survived past the 12th century, and all of them rapidly declined in importance. Court titles from the 8th to 11th centuries. In the 8th–11th centuries, according to information provided by the Tacticon Uspensky, the Cleterologion of Philotheos and the writings of Constantine Porphyrogenitos, below the imperial titles, the Byzantines distinguished two distinct categories of dignities: the dignities by award, which were purely honorific court titles and were conferred by the award of a symbol of rank, and the dignities by proclamation, which were officers of the state and were conferred by imperial pronouncement. The former were further divided into three subcategories, depending on who was eligible for them. Different sets of titles existed for the bearded ones, the eunuchs and women. State officials usually combined titles from both main categories, so that a high official would be both magistros and logothetes to dromou. Titles for the bearded ones, the by award titles for the bearded ones, were in descending order of precedence: proedros, president. Originally reserved for eunuchs, it was opened up in the mid-11th century to bearded ones as well, especially military officials. Magistros. In the early Byzantine state, the magister officiorum was one of the most senior officials, but as his duties were gradually relegated to other officials by the 8th century, only the title was left. It remained a high honor, and only rarely awarded until the 10th century. By the early 10th century, there were 12, the first in precedence among them bearing the title of proto-magistros. Thereafter the number of its holders was inflated, and the office vanished sometime in the 12th century. Vestarches, head of the Vestae, adopted in the latter half of the 10th century for high-ranking eunuchs. It was awarded to bearded senior military officers and judicial officials of Constantinople from California. 1050 on. It disappeared in the early 12th century. Vestes, senior honorific title, first attested under John I Zimisks, awarded to both eunuchs and non-eunuchs. It survived until the early 12th century. The term is etymologically connected to the vestry and the imperial wardrobe, but despite earlier attempts to connect the vesti and the related title of vestarches, the head of the class of the vesti, with the officials of the vestry, and no such relation appears to have existed. Anthepatos, proconsul, originally the highest rank for provincial governors, it survived the creation of the theme system until, in the 9th century, it too became a purely honorific title. The variant protanthepatos was created in the 11th century to counter its decline in importance, but both disappeared by the end of the 12th century. Patrikios, patrician, established as the highest title of nobility by Constantine the Great, it remained one of the highest dignities until its disappearance in the Komnenian period, awarded to high-ranking officials, including eunuchs, and foreign rulers. The spouses of patricians bore the title patrikia. Protaspartharios, first Spartharios, as its name signifies. It originally was the title borne by the leader of the Spartharioi. For instance, in the 6th century Narses bore this title. It later became one of the most common high court titles, awarded to senior officials such as the Logothetai, the commanders of the imperial tagmata of the strategoi in charge of a theme. The title of Protaspartharios also signified admittance to the Senate. The office survived until the Paleologan period, but had declined to the 35th place of the hierarchy. Dyshypatos, twice consul, a very rare dignity, which originated possibly in the 8th century. Spatharocandidatos, a portmanteau of the titles Spartharios and Candidatos, both of which were types of palace guards in the 4th–6th centuries. The earliest references to the title occur in early 8th century, and the title is clearly attested only from the early 9th century on. Its distinctive badge was a golden chain worn around the chest. Spartharios, spather-bearer, as the name signifies. The Spartharioi were initially a special corps of imperial guards. They performed specific duties inside the imperial palace. The title survived until the early 12th century. Hypatos, consul. As in the Roman Republican Empire, the title was initially given each year to two distinguished citizens, until Justinian I halted the practice due to the extraordinary expenditure it involved. The title continued to be occasionally assumed by emperors on accession until the end of the 7th century. Honorary consuls, however, continued to be named, as attested by seals bearing the titles Hypatos or Apohypatin. The title was often conferred to the rulers of South Italian city-states. Strata, groom, candidatos, from the Latin candidatus, surnamed because of the white tunics. They were originally a select group of guards, drawn from the Scolae Palatini. The title disappeared in the Komnenian period. Basilikos mandator, imperial messenger. Vestitor were officers of the imperial wardrobe. Silentiarios, originally a group of courtiers responsible for the maintenance of order in the palace. Stratelates, a translation of the Latin Magister Militum, and Apoepation, a translation of the Latin Ex Praefectus. These two titles are listed as equal by Philotheos. Both were still high dignities in the 6th century, but were devalued afterwards. Titles for the eunuchs by descending order of precedence. The by award titles for the eunuchs were proedros, president, This was an entirely new rank introduced in the 960s by Nikephoros II Phocas and first awarded to Basileia Carpanos, the eunuch Parakoimomenos. The holder of this dignity was also the president of the Senate, and the term proedros was often used to denote precedence, e.g., proedros of the notarioi for the protonotarios. The title was widely awarded in the 11th century, when it was opened up to non-eunuchs, prompting the creation of the protoproedros to distinguish the most senior amongst its holders. It disappeared in the latter 12th century. Vestarches, adopted in the latter half of the 10th century for high-ranking eunuchs. It was awarded to bearded senior military officers and judicial officials of Constantinople from California. 1050 on. It disappeared in the early 12th century. Patrikios, the same as for the bearded ones. Vestes, the same as for the bearded ones. Praepositos, from the Latin praepositus, placed before. Protuspatharios, the same as for the bearded ones. Primicarios, from the Latin primus-arius, first in the list. Ostiarios, from the Latin ostiarius, doorkeeper, usher. Spatheroko-ubicularios, sword chamberlain of ceremonial sword carrier assigned to the personal guard of the emperor. It later became a simple court rank. Cubicularios, from the Latin cubicularius, chamberlain. Nipsisterios, from Greek nu iota pi tau epsilon iota nu, to wash hands. The nipsisterios was tasked with holding a gold, gem-encrusted water basin and assisting the emperor in performing the ritual ablutions before he exited the imperial palace. Performed ceremonies. There is also a single special title reserved for women, that of Zospatrikia. This title was given to the Empress Ladies of Honor, and, according to Philotheos, ranked very high in hierarchy, above even the magistros and proedros and just below the kouropalates. The title is known from the early 9th century, and disappeared in the 11th century. Otherwise, women bore the female forms of their husbands' titles. Palace officers. Parakoimomenos, literally, one who sleeps nearby, was the high chamberlain who sleeps in the emperor's bedchamber, usually a eunuch. During the 9th–10th centuries, the holders of this office often functioned as de facto chief ministers of the empire. Protovestiarios, usually a minor relative of the emperor, who took care of the emperor's personal wardrobe, especially on military campaigns. He was also sometimes responsible for other members of the imperial household, and the emperor's personal finances. The older term, from before the time of Justinian I, was curopalata. This was derived from courator, an earlier official responsible for financial matters. The vestiarios was a subordinate official. The protovestiaria and vestiaria performed the same functions for the empress. Papias, great concierge of the imperial palaces, responsible for the opening and closing of the palace gates each day. Pincans, originally the emperor's cupbearer, later a senior honorific title. Caniclios, the keeper of the imperial inkstand, one of the senior officials of the imperial chancery. In the Komnenian and Paleologan period, some of its holders were de facto chief ministers of the empire. Epites trapezes, Greek, pi tau sigma tau rho alpha pi epsilon zeta eta sigma, the one in charge of the table, official responsible for attending to the imperial table during banquets. Military officers. Army exarchos. The exarchs were governors of remote parts of the empire such as Italy or Africa. They enjoyed a greater degree of independence than other provincial governors, combining both civil and military authority, practically acting as viceroys. Domestikos. The domestikoi were originally imperial guards, who later functioned as senior staff officers in the late Roman army. In the Byzantine period, they were among the highest military officers, and included Megas Domestikos, the overall commander of the army, Domestikos Unskolon, the commander of the Skolai, originally a number of guards units, later a tagma. This was a very prestigious title, and by the late 9th century, its holder functioned as commander-in-chief of the army. In California, 959, the post was divided, with one domestic for the east and one for the west. Domestikos Unthematin, the commander and organizer of the military themes, there was one for the European themes and one for Asian themes. Cade Pano, the governor of a greater area combining two or more themes, such as the Katapan of Italy, a title developed in the 9th century. Strategos, a military and later also civil commander of a theme, who often also had the title of Du. The term is basically equivalent to general or admiral, as it was used in both branches of service. Tuomaesh, the commander of a tuoma, a military unit of battalion size. Protostrator, initially the emperor's stable master. Under the Komnenian and Paleologan emperors, the term was used for the second-ranking commander of the army. Stratopedarches, this official was in charge of making sure the army was stocked with food and arms. Hoplitarches or archagetes, commander of all infantry in a large army. The title first appears in the mid-10th century, when the infantry is reorganized and gains in importance. Proto-kentarchos and kentarchos, commanders of a smaller division of the army in the field. The name was derived from the Latin centurion. Mirarches, commander of a division of the army. Usually each army was divided into 2 to 3 such commands. Taxiarches or chiliarches, commander of an infantry regiment in the army. Cavallarios, a title borrowed from the Latin cavallarius, it originally meant a cavalry soldier. During the Paleologan period, it became a minor court title. Navy Megasdu, the Megaduke or Grand Duke, was the basic equivalent of the modern Lord High Admiral. The office was created by Alexios I Komnenos, when he amalgamated the remnants of the imperial and thematic fleets into a single imperial fleet. By the end of the Paleologos dynasty, the Megaduke was head of the government and bureaucracy, not just the navy. Amirals, the Greek version of admiral, introduced via Sicilian practice, and office founded in the late Paleologan era for Western mercenary leaders and rarely held. The Amirals was the deputy of the Megasdu, Megastringarios, initially the commander-in-chief of the Byzantine navy. After the creation of the Megasdu, his lieutenant, in charge of the naval officers. Drangarios. The title existed both in the army and the navy. In the navy of the 8th–11th centuries, a Drangarios headed a fleet, either the Central Imperial Fleet or one of the thematic fleets. In the army he headed a drungos, roughly a battalion-sized grouping. Comes a drungaro comes, the commander of a squadron of dromons. Kentarchos or norarchos, the captain of a ship. Other military titles: Ethnarches, the ethnarch, commander of foreign troops. Konostolos, Greek form of Latin, comes stabili, count of the stable, and various European feudal titles such as English constable, the chief of the Frankish mercenaries. Hetariarches, the chief of the barbarian mercenaries, the Hetariat, successor to the Foederati, initially subdivided into Greater, Middle, and Little Hetaria. Akolithos, acolyte, the chief of the Varangian Guard from the Komnenian era onwards. Manglavitai, a category of palace guards, armed with sword and cudgel, under the command of a proto-Manglavites. Topatrates, meaning placeholder, lieutenant, found at various levels of the hierarchy, as deputies to commanders of the imperial tagmata, deputy to Drungarios.